Alright, so in this video we're going to go through some steps in processing a scanned image. A lot of these steps would be the same for an image that wasn't scanned, just a regular image from your digital camera or whatever. But I wanted to go through this in case we do something where we scan something and then clean it up. So we're going to go through the general steps. Most of those will be on a web page, which I'll show you in a second. There it is. Boy, that was good. You guys read that pretty quickly. The general steps in that, we're going to go through cropping, straightening, talk about the rule of thirds a little bit, spotting, getting rid of spots on the image, do some adjustment layers, do a little bit of sharpening near the end, a couple of ways to sharpen using unsharp mask and smart sharpen, and then we'll save it as a Photoshop file when we're done so that we can edit it again later if we wanted to, and then we'll go through quickly how to export both from Photoshop, and we'll kind of do the same process, the whole thing or most of it in Lightroom to see how it's different. Lightroom, if we do it in Lightroom, it's similar to what it would be in Camera Raw, a lot of the same controls and that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have this image called family photos, and this is sort of a gang scan, meaning it was all scanned at once, like 5 images, right? There's 5 images. So if you're scanning a bunch of images on a flatbed scanner, and a lot of printers now, all-in-ones, if it has the word all-in-one or the term all-in-one for your printer scanner thing, it has a scanner built in. So they're not super great, usually all-in-ones. They're more like a multi-purpose thing, but they do work. So we have 5 images that we scanned here, and these are obviously pretty old images, and what we're going to do is clean one of these up. So the first thing we're going to do, let's take a look here too. This is the page that I showed you here a minute ago. And this has kind of the steps that you would take. It talks about scanning as well and what resolution you should scan at. There's probably a different video that you'll see about scanning, but down here at the bottom it talks about the steps you might take, and we're going to do most of these: straightening and cropping, spotting, brightness and contrast, etc., color correction, and those are all on here. As far as the steps you would take, you don't have to do them in this order, but it's probably pretty close to the way you might want to do them. And then it also has information on using the 2 sharpening tools that we're going to talk about, which is unsharp mask, which is an older one, and then there's the smart sharpen now, which is a newer one. They both kind of work, and you can see how those work, and we'll kind of go through that. So this is a web page that you can refer to later if you want to. Okay, so so we've got this image, and we're going to use this image down at the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is go to the crop tool. So we've got our toolbar over here on the left, and I picked the 5th one down here, and it's the crop tool. You can also hit C on your keyboard. Then I'm just going to click and drag inside of my image. I could have dragged down from the outside to do the same thing. And I'm going to zoom in. So to zoom, I'm using a shortcut key, which is, you may have heard about this one before. It's Command plus to zoom in, Command minus to zoom out. On a PC, if you say it, if I say Command, I'm on a Mac. Same thing on a PC would be the control key. So it's Control plus and minus to zoom in and out. So that's why you don't see me doing any tools to zoom in and out. I'm using those shortcuts. Alright, so here's the image that I want to process here, and I'm going to drag the corners of my crop tool here. I can also go to get the size I want. I can also go to the edges here, and it changes into kind of a rotate thing, so I can rotate it there. And I'm just going to get about where I want and then hit enter. So this is different than it would crop in Lightroom, which is non-destructive cropping. The image is all still there, but here it's kind of gone. As long as, well, when we save it, it'll all be gone. So just be aware that that's a little bit different. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Another shortcut you can do is Command 0. If you go to View, and then Command 0 is Fit on Screen. So if you want to just zoom to as big as you can get it and still have it fit, just do Command or Control 0. Alright, so there's our image. I wanted to show you the straighten tool. Right here, and I don't think we really need to straighten this one, but if we did, we could grab this tool here, and what you do is you drag it along a straight edge like this. Let's say we thought this was a vertical line. It's not, and you see how I just dragged it along that edge and it made that line vertical. So That is the straighten tool. It works on buildings, works on any doorways, anything vertical like that. I could do it on this lampshade if I wanted to. I'm just going to click on it and drag. And that looks a little too crooked to me. I think just from perspective, that's why we're getting these angles here. So I think I'm pretty fairly straight as it is. Maybe not exactly, but pretty close. But that is the straighten tool. That's how that would work. Horizon obviously would be good, right? You're doing a landscape and you've got a crooked image. You just click and drag, put that line on the horizon. Let's say the horizon was like that, and it straightens it for you. And you see it's going to crop in. You're going to lose some image, but that's the way it goes when you're straightening stuff. You can also double click it, and it will try to auto straighten, but it won't really do anything. I don't believe on this one. No. So. Or maybe that's in another, that might be in Lightroom. I'm not sure that works in this version of Photoshop, but try it. Give it a shot if you want in whatever version of Lightroom or Photoshop you're in, and it might straighten it. There's some weird features that are in one version of something and not in the other, and it depends if you have the CC version or whatever. So anyway, that's probably good enough. Another thing you can see here when we do the crop, we still have the crop tool active here. Is to, you can see this 9 or 6 lines here, 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it divides it up into 9 different areas of the screen. So what that is could help you with is something called the rule of thirds, which we may or may not have talked about already, but just to reiterate, what it says is basically interesting areas of your image, it would be good to put them on these lines that are about a third of the way from each edge. That one's a third away of that edge, that one's a third of the way from that edge, top, bottom, etc. And things tend to look good that way. It's kind of a compositional tool aid. You don't have to do it, but it's usually a good idea. So a lot of times you're going to want to have someone's face or their eyes more specifically about a third from the top of the frame, unless you have a good reason not to. Depends on the image, of course. But so I'm going to just drag the top of this image down a little bit. And then you see how these lines, this line kind of goes through most of their eyes here. We can even go a little bit more maybe. And we get a little better composition. Plus we're getting rid of some of this space up here, this stuff up here, which is pretty much wasted. So I'm just going to hit enter again. By the way, if you want to get out of the crop tool, you can hit escape. So I just hit escape and then it went away, and then I can drag to activate it again if I want to. So I'm going to go down here. Put them about right there. I'm even going to come in from the sides a little bit because I don't think we need to see all this junk back here. The edge of this image, this photograph is a little faded, so I'm going to crop in a little bit there too. And then I'll hit enter on my keyboard to accept it. I don't know if I told you that before, but you can hit enter to accept it, and then you've got your new crop. So now we've got them kind of in a little better spot as far as where we want to put them. So that's good. So the next thing we're going to do is do a little bit of spotting. So what is spotting? Spotting is getting rid of spots. That makes sense, huh? You can have dark spots or light spots. If you look in this image, I'm going to zoom in again. I just zoomed in twice, and then I'm going to hold down the space bar. Remember, you can use the space bar to change to the hand tool or the grab tool, and then you can move around in your image. So just hit the space bar. And whatever tool you're in, or most tools, you can temporarily get the move tool or the hand tool, which is right here, down here. So you can see there's a lot of spots in this image, and that's because there's spots on the original image. If it's a print, you might have white spots on it. If it's a slide, you might have black spots where the light didn't go through the slide. And you're like thinking, well, what if it's a digital film or digital image from my digital camera? I'm not going to have any spots, right? I didn't scan it. But you might. The reason you might is because maybe there was some spot on your lens. That might be a fuzzy spot, but you might have a kind of a sharp spot if you have dust on your image sensor in your camera, which is a bad thing to have, but can happen. But you could use these tools to get rid of it. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the, first I'm going to try the healing brush here. Or I'm sorry, the spot healing brush. So I'm going to click and hold here on the spot healing brush, and you see all these tools underneath. There's spot healing brush, patch tool, content aware move tool, red eye tool, a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to use the spot healing brush, and that's the no-brainer tool for this kind of stuff. All I'm going to do is click on some of these spots to make them go away. How do I change the size of my brush? This uses what's called a brush, right? So I can use up here in the options bar, I can click on that little arrow and get the options. I can change the size of my brush. There's a giant brush or a really small brush if I want. I can change the hardness. Probably don't want a hard brush here, so I'm going to remove that down to 0. That makes kind of a soft edge to it. If you have a hard edge brush, you might see a seam, for example, between things. So between where you painted and where you didn't paint. So maybe I'll go down on low numbers here, but not 0. But you probably don't want to use 100 for this. I'm going to use a soft brush to kind of blur the edges of whatever I'm doing. The rest of this is some more options that you could mess with if you wanted to, but mostly you want to worry about size and the hardness, but mostly size, actually. Well, yeah, size and hardness there. So I think that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And then to resize, I can always go back here to resize, right, with the size slider there. But an easier thing to do, much faster, is to use your square brackets on your keyboard. That works for almost every brush as far as I can think of in Photoshop. I'm just hitting the right square bracket, which is next to your P key, or kind of near it, to make a bigger brush, and this left square bracket next to the P key to make it smaller. So you just want a brush that's slightly larger than your spots. You don't want a giant brush because you're going to have more margin for error. So I'm going to make a smallish brush here. You can see it there. I'm just going to click on this little spot, see what happens. Kind of have a little bit left, so I'm going to go a little bigger, and it may be because I'm pretty soft on the brush. Let's make it a little harder. Let's go up to about 30, something like that. And then probably could use a smaller brush now. Let's try it again. That's good. I think I'm getting an after image on my eyes, but all right, so see how that is kind of magical, right? So I'm just clicking on these little things. These are just little spots. There's a billion of these on this photo, so I'm not going to do them all, but just so you get the idea. And you want to use a brush that's, again, just bigger than I'm going to zoom in here a little bit more so you can see even better. You just want a brush that's bigger than, slightly bigger than your spots. So here's a big one right here. You can actually drag with this tool as well if it's a little bigger problem. Here's kind of a squiggly one. There we go. So kind of get rid of that. There's a big white one. So, oops. Okay, you can hit it again if you want. So this is doing all of this automatically. You also have different options up here in the type for this. You can say content aware, create texture, and proximity match. I'm not going to go into what those are, but basically what I would say is leave it on proximity match, and then if that's not working well, you could try the other two. It's proximity match basically means it's looking around where you're clicking for pixels that would work, which works most of the time. So, but if it doesn't work, you could try those other two settings. So that's pretty good. So I probably should have duplicated this layer before I did that, just in case I did something I didn't want to do. So because I'm changing pixels, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Pretend I didn't do all that spotting already. And to duplicate a layer, you can just drag it to the new layer icon down here at the bottom, or you can do Command J. I'm going to drag it down here. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you're using these tools, the spotting tool, you actually are changing the pixels. In a minute, I'll show you some. We'll do some filters to sharpen, for example, and with that you can use what's called a smart object, which leaves your original layer okay or untouched in case you change your mind about something. But these tools that we're using right now don't do that, so you kind of needed a layer. So I could have done it. I was doing it on the background layer, which is the original image, but to be safer, I could always duplicate that layer. So that's what I'm doing. I duplicated the layer, and now I'm on background copy. It's just kind of a backup. It's kind of a safety thing. So maybe you change your mind, and somebody's like, "I wanted all those spots. I really like spots." Could happen, right? Then if you did them all on the background layer, they're all going to be gone. So you could say, "Oh, here they are. They're underneath here." And again, to turn on and off the layers, you click on the eyeball. To rearrange them, you can drag them up and down. You can think of these layers as sort of sheets of plastic with stuff on them. They can be text, they can be images, they could be Illustrator stuff, they can be what's called smart objects, which are kind of references to other files. They can be all kinds of things, shapes, all kinds of things. All right, so I think that's pretty good on that tool. I'm going to go up here and show you a different tool. There's a big spot up here on the lampshade on the edge here, and if I use this spot healing brush, it kind of doesn't look great. If you guys can see that on your screen, if I click on that it makes kind of a white, because it's looking around, right? It makes kind of a white thing. I could try my content aware. Let's try that. Hey, that was better. There you go. So I used content aware, and that did a better job, which means it's looking around at the surrounding area more. Let's try create texture. That's not going to work. No, that just makes a texture. So content aware actually works pretty well. But let's say we wanted to try something else, and I want to try something else because I want to show you the tool. Is underneath the spot healing brush, there's a healing brush tool. So I'm going to grab that. The difference between these is the spot healing brush does all the thinking for you. For this one, you kind of have to do a little bit. So I'm going to make a slightly larger brush, and then what I do is I hold down Option or Alt. So I'm holding on Option on the Mac or Alt on the PC, and then I click. And what you're doing is you're setting what's called a sampling point. You're setting a point where you want to take the pixels from and kind of use them somewhere else. So since this is on the edge of something, that's what makes it kind of a little bit of an issue. It's not in the middle of some area. Then this might be a good tool for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go right on the edge where I'm at here. The edge below this spot, I'm going to hold down Option. You see I get a crosshair there, and I click. And then I start to move over where I want to fix, and you can see it even gives you a little preview. It kind of drags that preview up for you. And then I'm going to kind of put it where I think I want us to go. And there you go. That's pretty good. So that's before and after. To get before and after, by the way, I'm just doing Command Z or Control Z on a PC. If you go up to Edit, it's also right there. It won't say undo and redo. It'll say the actual thing you did. So it says redo healing brush, undo healing brush, redo healing brush. So it just alternates, right? There's also, which is kind of good, step backwards, which is Command Shift or Option Z or Control Z, which is step backwards right there. All right, so that worked pretty well. So that is the spot healing brush again. So if I move over here and I use it, it does some weird thing because, let me make a bigger one. See that? It's kind of blending in where I sampled from and whatever's already there, and I get that weird thing there. So you would have to change. You can always change your sampling spot by clicking, holding down Option or Alt and clicking, and then doing it that way. One more tool I wanted to show you. This is an old school one, but it comes up sometimes. It's called the Clone Stamp tool, and you could have done that same thing up there with the Clone Stamp tool. The Clone Stamp tool is more literal. It actually is going to clone and copy pixels from one area to another. So you could do things like repairs like we just did on the lampshade spot there, but you could do even more radical stuff like, let's say she really, really loves this cat, right? And I'm going to go down here, and I'll click on the cat with the Clone Stamp tool. Same thing as far as how you set it up. You hold down Option or Alt. I'm going to click on the cat, and then I'm going to go up here, make a smaller. Let's say she loves this cat. She wants to put on her t-shirt. Make it a little bigger so I don't get it, but small enough that I don't get her skin in there. And click once, and there you go. She made a t-shirt with the cat on it. Isn't that nice? But it copies everything, right? It does. I mean, you can make some adjustments and things, but basically think of it as literally copying one area of an image to another. So and it can be used for repairs as well. All right, so I'm going to pretend that you guys went through this whole image and got rid of all these spots. Down here, there's a bunch of them down here on the left and down here at the bottom. So I think we are good on that. So the next thing we want to do is to adjust the contrast a little bit. So how do we do that? Well, there's a ton of ways you can do that in both Photoshop and Lightroom. What I'm going to do is a pretty simple one using an adjustment layer called Levels. So what I'm going to do is go down here to this button that looks like a black and white cookie down here in the bottom right. I'm going to click on that and go to Levels. And what Levels is, it shows you, this is called a histogram. This is basically a bar graph of your image from dark to light. This little black slider is your black point, white is up here, and gray is in the middle. So this is literally a graph of the brightnesses in the image. So we can see by looking at this graph that there's nothing that's black and there's nothing that's white. It's kind of empty on both ends. So the way you can improve a lot of images, not all images, but most images, is to spread the images in, or the pixel brightnesses in the image out so they take up the whole range. It's kind of like you're redistributing them a little bit. So all you have to do that is drag in. I'm just going to click on this black point here and drag over a little bit until I get to a spot in the histogram where there is some data there. And then I'm going to click on the white one and drag in until I get to a spot in the histogram where there's some data there again. And you can see how much difference that made. If I want to change the brightness, I can go here and slide the center one, which I don't think I'm going to do because actually I think it looks pretty good with this normal brightness of 1. That's called the gamma, I believe, on this one. And that's it. So that's an old school way to kind of do that. Like I said, there's 14 million different ways to adjust contrast in an image in Photoshop and Lightroom, but that's one that's old and it works well on this image, and it's easy to do. Oh, I should have mentioned what contrast is. What is contrast? That is the ratio of your dark to your lights. So if you have a low contrast image, say I did this, you can use these bottom sliders to make a low contrast image. It looks like you have a vision issue, right? It's like we're spreading out. We're only using these shades of gray right here. If I go this way, if I go the other way on the top sliders, it makes it more contrast. If you go more contrast. If you go too far, it looks like you have a nuclear war kind of going on. We don't want to do that. So we want to go out to where we kind of about where we were. And that's probably good. So you can click on this guy to hide that option, and then there you go. So the good thing about these adjustment layers is they are non-destructive. Whenever you hear the term non-destructive, means you haven't changed this bottom layer at all. I can turn this layer off with the eyeball right here in the layers palette, and I see my original or the last thing that I did up here. You can also double click on it or open the properties panel here, and you can see you can change it again. Maybe change your mind. You can change all these. So that's what's really good about adjustment layers, is they're non-destructive and you can edit them after. You can do the same effect here. I could click on this layer and go to image adjustments and levels. Here it is. And it would do the same adjustment, but it would be permanent because it's actually doing them to the pixels. So always use an adjustment layer probably in this situation here. All right, so I think that is pretty good for that. So I think we've adjusted what we've done. We've cropped it from our list here. We have straightened and cropped it. We didn't really just straighten it, but we cropped it. We spotted it. We'll pretend that we did all of it. We changed the global contrast. We could do color correction, but I don't think we need to do a ton on this image. It looks kind of okay. And there will be a different video probably on color correction because it's kind of a big area. So we'll see other stuff on color correction. So we'll skip on that one. You can also do selective tonal or color correction. What does that mean? That means you can brighten or darken different areas of your image or do color correction in different areas. So that's a possibility, and we'll see in other videos again how you can do that. Actually, I'll show you how to do selective tonal in the Lightroom part of this video. Next thing we're going to do is sharpen, and then we're close to done here. So I'm going to go, I could do this a couple ways. I could take this layer and duplicate it again, because sharpening does change the pixels, or I could sharpen this layer directly. But to be a little safer, what I can do is change this into a smart object layer or smart object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to right click on this background copy layer, and I'm going to go to convert to smart object. So what does that mean? That basically means it's going to save the original layer as kind of an embedded layer, and then we're going to do stuff on top of it, almost like an adjustment layer. They can get pretty complicated. You can have different kinds, like you can have linked ones and embedded ones and all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it gets confusing about what's actually going on with the image, because some of these it's kind of like references to other things. But now for instance, if I double click this now, it opens this thing that says background copy.psb. It's kind of like it made a new file and shoved it inside this file. So it's like a reference to another file, even though it's in the same file in this case. That's called embedded. I know it sounds like rocket science, but anyway. But notice now what happened. I'm on a smart layer or a smart object now, and if I look at I'm still in my clone stamp tool, and it's got the little no, you can't do that symbol on there. That's because you can't do that, use that tool on that kind of layer. So you have to kind of be careful what kind of layer you want to use. But I know that we're kind of done with those tools, so I'm going to go ahead and convert it now. Because all I want to do now is I want to sharpen it. So I'm going to go to filter and then sharpen, and I'll do it with an unsharp mask first. And this is an old tool that a lot of people still use and like. It sounds like it's an unsharpening filter, but it's a sharpening filter. It comes from an old an old photographic technique in a darkroom. So what does this do? So amount is kind of the amount of uh, of sharpening it's going to do, and it's basically looking for edges and enhancing them to make them look a little crisper. So that's kind of what it's doing. So you're probably going to go somewhere between 150 200%. I'm pretending that we're going to put this on a web page or send it to someone, not print it. So what I do in that case is I say sharpen to taste. But for print, it's a little different. So it's recommended to go like 150 to 200 or something like that. So we'll leave it at about 150-ish, something like that. The radius can be anywhere from 1. You might start around 1, but you can go up to 2 if you need to. That might be a little bit much. If you go too, it may be a little high. If you go too high, you get this, again, radioactive kind of halo look, which you probably don't want. So you're probably almost always going to be between 1 and 2. Threshold is a weird one. What threshold does is you think it's turning it up, but it's actually turning it down if you go to the right. If you want to turn it up, you go to the left. What it means is threshold means how different do the edge pixels have to be to make them sharpen. Well, what does that mean? Basically means the higher you go on this threshold slider, the more it's going to ignore small changes in your image and only apply sharpening to bigger changes or bigger thresholds. That's what threshold means. So I think by default, when you open it, it probably said 0 because that's the default, which is not a good number to use. It's weird that they set it for that. So we're going to go about 4. 4 is probably a pretty good starting thing, and you can go ahead and go from there. So we've got about 150, 1.5 radius, and then threshold. And these details too, sorry to jump around here, but the details for these are on that page that I showed you, so you can go take a longer look at that if you want to. So I'm going to say OK, and there we go. So if I turn on that, oh, here it is, smart filters, see the unsharp mask. If I turn that on and off, let me zoom in here a little bit so you can see a little better. Let's go right here. So if I click on the eyeball here, you can see the before and after on that sharpening. Quite a big difference, right? So that is unsharp mask. I wanted to show you another way to sharpen, which is kind of a newer way that a lot of people like. You got some people who like the unsharp mask and some people like the smart sharpen. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. I can right click on it, and actually I'm just going to Command J it. Be fancy. So Command J will duplicate the layer, or again you can drag it down to the new layer icon. I'm going to get rid of the filter that I have on here, so I'm going to right click on where it says unsharp mask right here and go to delete smart filter. So now it's still a smart object because I can see that little icon down there. I can actually make this even bigger for you guys, I think. There we go. Yeah, so the way I do that, by the way, is I go to layers, the little flyout menu at the top right, and go to panel options, and you can make a bigger thumbnail, which is sometimes nice. So the little icon down here on the right of the panel of the icon for the layer means it's a smart object. So this time I'm going to deal with smart sharpen. So I'm going to go to filter and sharpen and smart sharpen, which is smart. So this is a newer process than the unsharp mask, but some people prefer unsharp mask. But the cool thing about this is it's a resizable window, which is kind of cool. You can zoom in and out here. For some reason, you cannot zoom in and out in the window, but it does zoom over here. But you can zoom with the buttons. So here we go with Smart Sharpen, and the way this works is basically the way to use this is you want to crank this amount up to like 300-ish, somewhere around there. And this is a processor-intensive thing. You can see my processors go nuts when I do that. And then radius, you want to crank that up until you get this radioactive look, and then back it off. And I think it uses your graphics card on your computer, so yours might be faster than mine actually. So I'm gonna go, I don't know, around there somewhere. And the preview button here will show you the before and after in the background here, but I can see it here in my window here. Let me zoom in just a little bit more. Okay, so I'm gonna say that's kind of okay. And then you can always, once you get the radius so it's not causing the halos, you can even go higher on the amount if you want. Although that looks a little bit, it's getting kind of bad. So I'm going to back it off just a little bit. This also has a slider here for reduce noise. So what's that for? If you have an image that has a lot of noise in it, especially an image that has some dark shadows that have stray pixels in them, of the wrong color, that's what you get when you shoot with a digital camera. This is a scan, so it's not really relevant. But if you have an image that you shot in a dark situation and with a digital camera, sometimes you'll get noise in it. So sometimes this sharpening process makes the noise worse because you can see the noise more. So if you want to get rid of it, that's what this slider's for. There's also some other options here that you probably don't need to use a ton, but you can basically select how much of this filter is going into the shadows and the highlights if you get issues with halos and stuff. You can check that out too. But that's basically how that works. There's more detail here, and you can always look in the help file for Photoshop to see more detail than you ever wanted on these different dialog boxes. So I'm going to say OK, and there we go. So I'm going to zoom back out, Command 0, and there it is. There's before and after the Smart Sharpen. So which one looks better? I don't know. You guys have to decide. Let's zoom in here a little bit. So that's the Smart Sharpen one. If I want to see what the one behind it looks like was the one I did the unsharp mask, you could do that. So I'm going to go turn that one off. I think the Smart Sharpen looks a little better. Here's what it looks without any. See, it's kind of blurry now, right? Plus, it doesn't have the cool cat. I think I'm going to stick with the Smart Sharpen, but again, that's up to you, personal preference. So I think we are good with that one. So we did our sharpening. The last thing we want to do is, oops, we're going to go up here, is target for print or web. So we're gonna act like we're gonna save this just to send it to somebody or put on Facebook or something like that. So I'm going to show you how to save it out as a JPEG or different files. So all I have to do here is, there's a bunch of ways to do this. I'm going to go to File. Oh, by the way, what did I not do that I should have done a long time ago? I'm still on my original photo, familyphotos.psd. If I save this file right now, all those other photos are gone. The other ones I scanned. I don't want that. So I'm going to go to File and Save As, not Save, Save As, and save it as Family Photos 2, let's say, and I'll save it on the desktop to be simple, and save. So now I know that and you can just leave this, where it says maximize compatibility. Go ahead and say OK. Now I know my original image with all those other images is still OK. If I would have saved this file as is, all those other scans would be gone. So don't ever do that. You always want to keep your originals, right? That's the main rule of thumb. All right, so now I'm going to save this out as a JPEG. I'm going to go to File, and I'll do it 3 different ways to be annoying. I'm going to go to File and Save As, and I can just pick for format. I can pick JPEG here, and then I will call it familyphotos2.jpg, and I'll save it on the desktop, sure, and I'll click Save, and it's going to give me this JPEG options dialog box. If you're going to go on the web or something, you might pick this progressive thing. That makes it come in and kind of a little more quickly so the user can see it if they're on a web page or something. And then this slider is the quality, right? So you don't get a preview. Well, I guess you do get a preview here. The lower you go here, if I go to 0, am I seeing a preview? Not really seeing a preview. This is not giving me a good preview. This would normally should look really bad. I'm going to pretend that this is working, and I'm going to tell you just to keep it up kind of high. If you go all the way up to maximum, it's going to look really good, but the file size is going to be big. If you go all the way down to 0, the file size is going to be really small. That's the file size right there, but the quality is going to be small or bad, low. So I'm going to say stick around 9 or 10 in general, and it's kind of a compromise. It's still going to look really good, but it's going to be a lot smaller than your if you set it on 12 or 11, like if you're watching Spinal Tap. So I'm going to leave it there at 10. That's up to you. I'm going to say OK, and we did that. All right, so now, sorry to pause there for a sec. We are going to, I'm going to show you how to do it a different way. So I'm going to go to, this time I'm going to go to File and Export, and I'm going to go to Export As. This dialog is fairly new, and it still kind of seems like buggy to me at the time of this video, but we'll see if it works. So this one will give you a preview, and you can choose the different formats and things up here besides just JPEG or something. So up here in the top it says format PNG. That's called a portable network graphic. That is kind of a typical file that people will save, file type that people save images for, especially for on the web. But it's a pretty big file, and it has transparent. It can have transparency. We don't have any transparency in this image. It's kind of for web stuff. But we don't really need it for this image because we're not going to do web design with this image. So I'm going to go up here to format and change it to JPEG again, which is the one we just did a minute ago. And then you can see it gives you a preview here. And I can resize this window. Here we go a little bit. And then there's a quality slider up here, which was not working a little while ago. Let's see if it works. Is it working? I'm going to go really low. Yes, it is working. So that's, if you go really low in this dialog box for quality, you see the quality does go down and the file size gets smaller. It tells you right down here in the bottom right what the file size is. This is, again, relative for, how big of a file you want to send. It's more relative for stuff on a website. This is kind of what this is for. So I'm going to go up to about quality 70, which is usually pretty good for a JPEG. Most JPEGs will look pretty good at 70. I could go to 100, but it's going to make my file bigger. And then right here you could size the image if you wanted to as you save it, if you wanted to do that. But we're not going to talk about that really right now. You can also do more than one image at a time, I believe. There's a bunch of stuff this dialog can do. But let's say that we're done with that. I'm going to click export, and I'll save this one as family photos 3.jpg, and just to see that we did a different one there, and then it closes up. So those, since we did the export there, it doesn't really do anything to this image, right? So we still have our original. We always want to save our PSD file because we could go back and close this. We could save it, right? Command S, and use the little asterisk one away up here. I can save this, go to File and Save, and then the asterisk goes away that was up here, and then I can always close this and reopen it, and all these layers will still be here. I can still adjust my smart sharpen and my unsharp mask and my levels and all that. If I just save my JPEG and get out of this and throw away this PSD or something, I can't go back and change all this stuff. It's done. It's baked in. So make sure you save different versions for what you need, right? So you always want to save a PSD, which saves all your layers, all your adjustments, and all that fun stuff. And then you want to save your final version, which is, you're going to give it to somebody or something. You want to do a JPEG or a PNG or GIF, some other stuff like that. One more thing to show you, and this is kind of going away, but I'm going to show you anyway because I like the way it works. I'm going to go to File and Export, and then down here there's Save for Web Legacy. By the way, if you wanted to export really quickly and never have to mess with those settings, you can go to Export Preferences. Set your preferences there, like a JPEG and a quality 10 or something like that. And then I didn't show you that very long, but you'll see what I mean. And then you can go to File and Export and Quick Export, and it will just save it that way. And it won't ask you what you want to do, what settings or anything, because it's using these preferences to do this quick export thing. So that's for people that are in production and they have to make hundreds of pictures a day and they know they want the same settings all the time. They just go to File, Export, Quick Export, boom, done. Right, so that's what that is. We want to go down to Save for Web, and it says Legacy because during this video they're saying, hey, we're going to get rid of this. But I still like it, so I'm going to show it to you anyway. Why do I like it? Because it comes up with this giant dialog that lets you compare how the images look in different settings. So here's my original. If you click on up here at the top, it says Original, Optimize, 2 up, and 4 up, right? So if I go to 4 up, I can see my original here, and I can try three different versions with different settings in the rest of these areas. So let's say I want to try that as a JPEG, and I want to try this one as a PNG. Here's PNG 24. That's a PNG 24-bit. That's a full color image. And I can see how big those files are. So if I do this as a PNG 24, it's 2.291 megabytes. That's pretty big. Your grandma's going to get mad if you try to send that to her in an email. I mean, she might like it, but it's going to be big, right? Here the JPEG is much smaller. So that's what JPEGs are kind of good at, is compressing. which is basically a fancy way of saying making the file smaller. I should be getting a. I'm not really seeing my preview very good either on this one. This should look really bad if I turn this quality to 0, but it's not. So I'm not seeing something's up with my video card or something here. But basically, that's how that one works. And you can also pick other types of files. You can make GIFs in here and other things too. But that's another possible way to export that. So let's say I wanted to use this JPEG setting here, and I want to put the quality at 65 or something. I think that looks pretty good. And I can set some other things as well, but we're going to skip that for now, especially because this dialogue is kind of going away maybe. And I will say save, and I'll save this one as family photos 3, I guess, or 4. We're on 4 already. And there you go. So that's a third way to do it. So I gave you 3 ways to do it. You go to File, Export, or maybe 4 ways. Export as, that's 1. Export Quick Export, that's 2. That one you set up in Export Preferences. The third way is Save for Web, which is Legacy. Oh, and I did a 4th one. I can go Save As and pick JPEG if I want to do a JPEG. And you can export it as all these other things too. And then save that, and that's a 4th way. That's a little bit crazy, huh? So anyway, that's plenty. Okay, I also did want to show you quickly how you can do kind of the similar kind of thing in Lightroom, which would also be how you would do it similarly to Camera Raw. We're going to spend a lot of time on Camera Raw / Lightroom kind of processes, so this will be in less detail, but I did want to show you how that works. So here's the same image again in Lightroom. And what I'm going to do here is I'm in the develop mode here. So I've imported this image into Lightroom. I go to the develop mode or module. Here it is in library. Here it is in develop. Then I'm going to click the crop tool, which is right over here on the right. And then I'm going to crop about right there. Now, one thing you can't really do is you can't really zoom while you crop. So if you're going to crop really small like this, it's a little hard to see, but I'm going to just do as the best I can, eyeball it, and do it quickly here. If I need to rotate, maybe a tiny bit, I don't know, something like that. I hit enter on my keypad again, and I'm good with that. So now I need to spot again. So just quickly show you how you would do spotting in Lightroom as opposed to Photoshop. I'm gonna pick. I'm gonna grab the spot healing or spot removal tool here. It's right next to the crop tool. It's called spot removal. You can also hit Q. And the way this works is same kind of way. I'm going to make I can still use my square brackets to make smaller or larger brushes. But this time when you click, you'll see another circle pop up. So this is non-destructive. Everything in Lightroom and Camera Raw, and I keep mentioning Camera Raw and Lightroom together, that's because a lot of the processes are exactly the same. A lot of the computations inside are the same. So it's very similar. But anyway, so everything inside of Camera Raw and Lightroom is non-destructive. So it's not going to, we don't have to worry about layers and all that. You can't actually do that kind of stuff in layers. So we're not going to worry about it that much. But what it's doing is it's showing you where it's sampling from. So let's try that other problem area that we had over here. And actually it figured that out. It figured out that it should use this edge over here that we had before. Here's another one. Let's say this is just a little circle, right? So every time you click, it tells you where it's going to sample from, and then that's your sampling point. If you want to change it, instead of redoing it and holding down Option and clicking somewhere, you just drag the sample point, and you can see the preview changes down here. Same with this one. If I click on it, and then I go like that, you see how it kind of gets messed up there. So it chose wisely, as someone would say. So that's kind of how you spot in there. I'm not going to do the rest of it because you see how that kind of works. What I'm going to do next is go down here to the basic adjustments, and that's where you're going to do most of your damage here, or your good stuff, not damage. And I'm going to ignore white balance again, and temperature and color balance and that stuff again, because we're going to talk about that later. We'll assume that it's the right color. But what I would do is maybe adjust exposure. I think my exposure is actually pretty good. But if I want to just adjust exposure, which is it's right there, I am going to add a tiny bit of contrast there. And I'm going to bring the whites up So this highlight slider will bring up or down the highlights. I don't really need that. That's more for photography, outdoor stuff. Shadows as well. I could bring up the shadows or down the shadows. Light, highlights, same thing with highlights. What I am going to do is try to, here's my histogram again. You can see it still has those holes on the ends. So what I'm going to do is take the white slider and slide it to the right. And see how this moves to the right? Same thing as we did with levels in Photoshop. So I actually had to go all the way over to get it kind of over there. And that's probably good. And I go into blacks. Here's the black side right here. I'm going to slide the blacks to the left until it starts to get over to the edge there. You can actually turn on these warnings here in the top of your histogram. And then if I go too far, you see how it starts to turn blue or black even? That means you're clipping. That means you're getting rid of all the details. So you don't want to go that far. So I'm going to back off a little bit. Those are kind of warnings. Then I'm going to go to presence, and it says clarity. Clarity is sort of increases the contrast in the mid ranges, and it makes it look kind of poppy. So it makes it pop a little bit, not poppy. I'm going to slide that to the right a little bit to make it pop a little bit. Maybe I will go up a little bit with the exposure a tiny bit. Okay, that's probably okay. And then vibrance is going to increase the saturation of non-saturated colors. So saturation obviously does all the colors, right? You can make it look black and white or all the way up, but I'm going to leave that in the middle. Vibrance is a little more selective. It will ignore colors that are already saturated, so it just gives the weak colors kind of a little boost. And there you go. And I could go down the tone curve if I wanted to, and I could adjust, give it some little bit more contrast. I think it's pretty contrasty already, so I'm just going to leave that at linear. And again, we're going to talk about all this stuff, probably most of it in other videos, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this in here. But let's say, so I've kind of done everything I did in the other video. I spotted it, I cropped it. I didn't finish the spotting, but you get the idea. And I adjusted the contrast with my contrast slider and clarity here. I did some of that, and I adjusted the contrast with the white and black sliders as well. And it looks similar to what we got in the other one. So to save this out inside of Lightroom, I'm going to go to File and Export. And I'm just going to leave it to, it says desktop here, but if I wanted to choose where I wanted to save it, I would click choose and pick somewhere, but I'm going to leave it on the desktop again. And then I'm going to go down until it says file settings for right here, and I'm going to choose JPEG again because we're going to stick with the JPEG for this video. And then I'm going to leave the quality at about 70, which is kind of what we were using before. If I wanted to, I could resize the image. I'm not going to, so I'm going to uncheck that. But if I wanted to resize it as I saved it, I could check that and then put in the sizes that I wanted to. But I don't need to do that in this video, but you could do that. And then this is called output sharpening. If you were going to print this, I probably would turn this on and then choose what kind of paper you're going to print it on, and then choose an amount, either standard or high, probably not low. That's for a high resolution image. For screen, I don't think it looks that awesome. So, and I've kind of already sharpened it. Oh, I didn't sharpen it, did I? Let's cancel out this real quick. I forgot I was going to show you the sharpening too. I left off one thing. Because we did sharpening in the other, in Photoshop, here it is. It's down here under detail. So if I go down in these controls here and I go down to detail, there's the sharpening. So I'm going to crank this over here a little bit. And then you see I got a mount, radius, and detail and masking. We're going to probably see that in other videos, so we've gone really long on this, so I'm gonna leave it at that. But I just applied some sharpening there. So that reminded me. Okay, so I'm going to go back to export. And I think everything is still the same. Yeah, so if I was going to print this, I might, let's pretend we are. Let's say we are going to print it. Let's click on this and then sharpen for, let's say, glossy paper. I was going to print it on glossy paper, and I'll use the standard amount. And what it does is it looks at the resolution of the image and the settings that you chose right here, and it tries to give you the optimum amount of output sharpening. So this is called input sharpening over here. This is called output sharpening because it's going to go out to your final file. And that's it. I'm going to click export. And if I look on my my computer here, here's the one we just did right here. That's the last one we did. And there's the ones we did in Photoshop. So that was a lot of ways to do some of that stuff. So hopefully that helps, and you can see that you can do some of this stuff in Photoshop and or Lightroom. And I will talk to you again next time.